What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Pagnuta for tutorials.eu. I'm back with another really amazing video, and this one is about dependency injection, which is a topic that I have been struggling with in the past when I started programming, and it is quite a complex topic, yet it is really powerful and it's not that complicated in the end once you really got it. And that's what this video is about. It's about the different parts of dependency injection, and I recorded those for the C# masterclasses update, so check that out. You can find the link in the description. And also I needed them for my ASP.NET course, which I updated as well. So dependency injection part 1 will be understanding what the dependency word in dependency injection is. Then part 2 is the super simple constructor dependency injection. Then we're looking at setter dependency injection, and finally at the interface dependency injection. So you need to understand what interfaces are and how they work in order for this to make sense. But at the same time, if you know a little bit about interfaces, then you will finally understand why interfaces are so powerful after having watched this video, because this is really where they shine. Like interfaces, as a beginner you think like, holy smokes, what is this? Why would we use something as complicated as interfaces? Well, this is one big part of it, so let's get started. Welcome back. In this video we're going to look at dependency injection and specifically into dependencies. So dependency injection is a very powerful concept in especially object-oriented programming languages. And in order to understand what dependencies are and dependency injection is, we first need to really dive deeper into dependencies, okay? So we're going to use a very simple example, which is going to be about a builder that needs tools. So what are dependencies? Dependencies refer to objects or components that a class needs in order to function properly. Think of dependencies as the necessary tools or services a class relies on to perform its tasks. So imagine you're a builder. To build a house, you need various tools like a hammer, a saw, nails, and a bunch more other tools. And these tools are your dependencies. So let's look at the dependencies in a practical example in our code. Okay, so let's start with a public class hammer. Okay, so we have a hammer and we will have a method in here which we will just call use. Okay, so we should be able to use that hammer, and when we do that, then whatever hammer logic happens. So hammering nails, for example, a very simple example. You're hammering nails. What is the hammer for? To hammer nails or to break something, right? Sometimes it's just to break something if you are renovating or whatever. So that's our hammer. Now let's create our builder, public class builder. All right. And now our builder needs a hammer. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a hammer. It will be a private hammer, so it will not be a property or whatever. And then in the constructor public builder, we need to set that hammer. So the hammer will be a new hammer. Okay. So here the builder is responsible for creating its dependencies. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the builder is responsible of bringing his hammer. If the builder doesn't set his hammer when creating himself or when going to work, so to speak, when he doesn't bring his hammer, he can't do the work. So there is our dependency. And then I can now go ahead and say the builder gets starting to build a house. And we're not going to pass anything here. We're just going to use our hammer, and then we're going to say the house is built. So house built. So obviously we need more than just a hammer. So how about we also bring our saw? So therefore, let's go ahead and create a saw, public class saw. Now the saw will also have a method, and you could call this saw method saw or sawing or something like that. Or you could also just say, okay, public void use. All right. So this method will just be also a simple console write line statement, and I'm going to say sawing wood. All right. And now our builder also mustn't forget his saw, and let's use it like this. So now we have a saw, but we haven't brought it with us yet. So we can bring it with us because saws exist, right? As a builder, we know saws exist. So at this point, I know that a saw exists. And at this point, I am actually bringing my saw. I'm bringing my new saw. Obviously, it doesn't always have to be a new saw, but we need to use the new keyword here to create a new saw. So now our builder, whenever he builds a house, can also go ahead and use his saw. Okay, so where is the dependency here? The dependency is that the builder depends on the hammer and the saw. So this is where now the saw and the hammer are dependencies of the builder. That's what we're basically saying. All right. So that's pretty much it for dependencies. Now in the next video, let's look into what dependency injection is. So how do we inject dependencies? So see you in the next video. Now that we have an idea of what dependencies are, let's look at dependency injection. What is it? Well, dependency injection, or DI, is a design pattern used to achieve inversion of control, called IOC, between classes and their dependencies. Instead of a class creating its own dependencies, they are provided from the outside. So a simpler way to say that would be using your builder that we built in the last video. Instead of the builder going out to buy tools, someone brings the tools to the builder. This way, the builder can focus on building without worrying about how to get the tools. And there are different types of dependency injections. There is constructor injection, which we're going to look at in this video, where dependencies are provided through a class constructor. So in the constructor, you are passing on the tools, such as the saw, such as the hammer, and so forth. Then there is setter injection, where dependencies are provided through a property or a method. And then there is interface injection, where dependencies are provided through an interface that the class implements. All right, so let's look at our example that we had from the last video and understand dependency injection, especially with the constructor injection. In our example, we used no dependency injection. So we did have a dependency, but we didn't inject the dependency. How can we change our builder class so that it uses dependency injection? We can do that by saying that, for example, you need to provide me a hammer whenever you want to use me as a builder, because I am just going to my job, like just doing my job, going to the site, to the construction site, but you need to provide me the tools because otherwise I can't do my job. Okay. So you need to give me the hammer and you need to give me my saw and whatever other tools we have. So now instead of the builder being responsible to create its dependencies, now it happens through injection. So we are injecting the hammer into the builder by just saying, okay, I'm going to provide you with a hammer whenever I'm going to use you. And I'm going to provide you with a saw whenever I'm going to use you. Okay, so this here now is constructor injection, or DI, dependency injection, DI. Okay, really cool stuff. So now if I want to use my builder, if I want him to build my house and I want him to use his methods, basically I want to use his methods to finalize my house, then I need to provide him with the tools like hammer and the saw and so forth. So now we can go ahead and say hammer, hammer, new hammer, and we can say saw, saw, new saw, and we can say builder, builder, new builder, and we're passing on the hammer and the saw to the builder. And now we can just use the builder to do its methods, such as build a house. So let's run this example to see what's going to happen. And we will see that we see nothing because we don't have the read line or read key here. So let's run this again. And we see here, hammering nails, sawing wood, house build. Beautiful. If it always was that simple, I think sawing wood should go before hammering nails, but whatever. Okay. So in this case, we have seen how dependency injection works with a constructor. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Now you know what dependency injection is, at least on a super simplistic example here. Okay, so we saw constructor dependency injection. Now let's look at setter dependency injection. So how is it different? Well, the thing is, in order to do that, we are going to use properties now instead of what we did before. So for example, we're going to create a hammer that will be the property for the hammer. And then we're going to use another property for the saw. Okay, saw, and this one will be a saw, or will be called saw. Actually, we should call the properties with a capital letter. So we have the saw now, and now instead of the builder using constructor dependency injection, what we're going to use is setter dependency injection. So setter di. So in setter di, we actually don't even need to call the constructor at all. So we can have a default constructor. All right, we don't need to create one ourselves. So even if you don't add a constructor, there is one provided by default, as we've seen before. And now we can use the builder, but we mustn't pass anything to the builder. So this new builder will still work. It will just create an empty builder object, which has properties that aren't assigned yet, right? And has this method that could be called, but is not really ready because neither the hammer nor the saw are set. They are empty at this point, right? So that means before we can use the saw and the hammer, we need to provide them to the builder. So we're creating a builder, and before we can call his build house method, if we call it, we should get an error you see here, null reference exception. So the problem here now is we are not passing the hammer nor the saw to our builder, not during the constructor, but during the setter. So how we can do that is we can just say builder dot hammer is going to be the hammer that we just created earlier on in this line. And now we can do the same thing with builder dot saw, and we can provide the saw from this line. And now at this point, we can build the house. We can run our code, and it will say hammering nails, sawing wood, build house build. So what we see here is setter dependency injection, where we are setting the dependencies. So the dependencies are hammer and saw, and we are setting them in these two lines. Okay, so what we're doing here is we inject dependencies via setters. Okay, this happens here as well as here. And here we're creating the dependencies outside. Good. So the cool thing is they can now be set from outside the class, and this gives us flexibility. So dependencies can be changed after the builder object has been created. In our earlier example, where we had the constructor, we could not change the type of hammer or the hammer that is used. So in our particular example that we have here, obviously the saw and hammer, they are fixed. But imagine we could use polymorphism where we inherit, let's say, a rubber hammer. That is also a hammer, so it has the same capabilities as a hammer, but on top of that, a rubber hammer can be used for other things, such as laying down the, I don't even know the English word, but like another hammer has other capabilities and on top of a default hammer, or like an electric saw is more powerful than a human saw, let's say. So we could have a saw that inherits from saw, but then is better because it has additional skills. And then we could still say, okay, we start giving the builder the default saw and the default hammer, but actually we're going to override them later on. So you could obviously combine the constructor DI with the setter DI. So with the setter dependency injection. And by the way, this is just one portion of the C# masterclass. So this video has been added to the C# masterclass. And if you want to learn more about C# programming, you should definitely check out the link in the description below, where you're going to learn everything else that you need to know about C#. And if there's anything missing in the course, let us know. We're going to add that to the course as well. All right, so check it out. There's a link in the description below. And if you know C# quite well already and you want to get to the next level and learn ASP.NET, then check out another link in the description where you can get the ASP.NET Full Stack Developer course. So thanks a lot and sorry for the pause. Now let's get back to the content. Good. So that's that for this one. And in the next video, we're going to look at interface dependency injection. So see you there. Okay, so now that we have seen the other two types of dependency injection, let's look at the third type, which is interface injection. So it involves providing dependencies through an interface that the class implements. So the interface itself defines the methods to set the dependencies. All right, so let's go ahead and create a public interface that I'm going to call iToolUser. Okay, so pretty cool name. You see here, the I is a capital letter. The second letter is also capital. So we're going to say that whenever you want to use a tool user like the builder, you need to set the hammer. So I'm going to say, give me a hammer, and you need to set the saw. And I'm going to say, give me a saw. So now the hammer still uses stuff. The saw is also just using, but the builder, that's where the change comes in. The builder is now an iTool user. So he is now a tool user, which means that he needs to set the hammer and he also needs to set the saw before he can build the house, or at least these methods need to exist. So we can go back to those being private fields. So private hammer underscore hammer, and let's add an underscore because it's private, and private saw underscore saw. Now, obviously, when we are using the hammer, we need to say hammer use, and when we're using the saw, we need to say underscore saw dot use. So now we still need to implement those two methods where we set the hammer and we set the saw. So let's hover over and give us the potential fixes, and let's say implement the interface. And what it does is it just creates those two methods for us. So set hammer, where we need a hammer. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that hammer and store it inside of the underscore hammer. So what we're just saying is set the hammer that you give to me to be used as the hammer of that builder. So the builder now gets a hammer whenever set hammer is set. And then we do the same thing with the saw. So just give me the saw whenever set saw is used. So now instead of using setters, we are using interfaces. Also, like you could call it setters, but we're using it with a more complex architecture. This allows us to now create more tool users. So it would not just be the builder who can use these tools, but it could also be somebody else. Like we have the builder and maybe the house builder or whatever, but then we also have a mechanic. Okay. And the mechanic is not a builder, but he could maybe still also be using a saw and a hammer. And in that case, we still need to provide those. So we can use set saw to set the saw, and we can use builder set hammer to set the hammer. So here dot set hammer and pass on the hammer. And which saw and hammer are we passing? Let me actually maintain the order in which we had it before. So we are passing on the hammer that we created here, the dependency, and the same for the saw. So we're passing those two to set hammer and set saw. And now we can use those, and we see hammering nail, sawing wood, house build. So you see, there are multiple different ways as to how to get dependency injection running. Okay, so now let's try and understand this a little better. So interface injection. In this case, the builder class implements the iTool user interface, which defines methods to set their dependencies. The advantage of this is that it gives us flexibility. So the dependencies are injected through interface methods, allowing the class to receive its dependencies from an external source. Now let's compare the three examples that we had. So we had the different injections, right? So let's compare the injection methods. We have the constructor injection. The pros are it ensures all dependencies are provided at object creation time, which is pretty cool. But there are cons to it as well. Dependencies cannot be changed after object creation. Then you have setter injection. The pros is that it allows changing dependencies after object creation. The cons are dependencies might not be set at object creation time, leading to potential null reference exceptions, as we have seen, right? We started running it and we saw it crashed because we didn't set the different dependencies that were required. Then interface injection that we just finished. The pros are it provides a clear contract for injecting dependencies through interfaces. So all of the advantages of interfaces are in here. But the cons are it requires additional interfaces to be defined for setting dependencies. So the conclusion, using the builder example, we've demonstrated 3 methods of dependency injection. The constructor injection, where dependencies are provided via the constructor. Setter injection, where dependencies are set through public properties or methods. And interface injection, where dependencies are injected through methods defined in an interface. Each method has its advantages and trade-offs, and understanding these can help you choose the best approach to your specific use case. By leveraging dependency injection, you can create more modular, flexible, and testable code. All right, and that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it this far, please leave a like and also subscribe if you haven't done so already. And then add a comment about what you would like to know and if you have any questions, because we are really happy about any questions that you come up with, and we are really happy to create more content. So thanks a lot again for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. And you should definitely check out this video by Yannick, where he teaches you ASP.NET within an hour. So see you there.